Hello, everybody, and welcome to MMA Start to Finish. I'm Julian, and this is Matt.
Hi.
You didn't hear it because we just edited it out, but this is our second take. And our first take, I called myself Matt because a little bit under the influence right now.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about UFC 4 today. UFC 4 Revenge of the Warriors. And UFC 4 took place in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the Expo Square Pavilion on December 16th of 1994.
Yeah.
And one of the first things we noticed right away was there's a new broadcast team. Not a completely new broadcast team. Jim Brown's still there.
Yeah.
But we got a couple new guys. Who was the guy you had written down? Because I didn't have him written down.
They have a new announcer, Bruce Beck.
Okay, yeah, that was one. And then they also had, for the first time, we saw Jeff Blatnick, who would be a UFC commentator for a while, I think. Up until the Rogan Mike Goldberg era, I'm pretty sure he was the color commentator. I think Rogan took his place when Joe Rogan eventually became the commentator. So this is who we're going to have on color commentary for a while. And to start off the night, I actually thought it would be fun for us to look at the alternate bouts that we didn't see, because there's some names that I recognize and Matt will recognize too in the alternate bouts that we didn't see. So we had Guy Mesger, who I'm aware of and we will see later, win by a TKO corner stoppage in 2 minutes. And Kevin Rozier, UFC 1 veteran, lost in 14 seconds to an armbar.
Jesus Christ.
So, yeah, Kevin didn't go on to fight in too many more mixed martial arts fights, I believe. Let me see if I'm wrong about this, because there is the chance that he had a bunch of fights, and I'm assuming something here. No, he didn't have too many more. That was his last UFC fight. He'd fight in a couple more different promotions up until the year 2000, but never in the UFC again. So this would be the last time we would see our friend Kevin Rozier. So the first fight we actually did see was Royce Gracie versus Ron Van Cleef. And I don't know why they did this to this poor man, but Ron Van Cleef was 50 years old?
51.
51 years old. He's 75 today. He's 75 today. That was, I'm looking at his mixed martial arts record right now, his only fight.
Yeah.
That seems about right. He lost in, it was almost 4 minutes actually, which, you know, is respectable against Royce Gracie, especially considering that Ron Van Cleef had no grappling experience. He was a karate guy, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, they served up a softball to Royce to start the night. Yeah, Royce was really just trying to obtain position to set up the choke, and it says it was a triangle choke. I think that sounds right. I think it was a triangle, but you know, sometimes I say I think because sometimes the results get a little wacky on these really early cards because they didn't understand what submissions were what half the time.
Yeah.
So it's a little wonky sometimes, but I think they got it right that time.
Yeah.
The next fight we have, boy howdy, do we have a lot to talk about here?
Oh, man.
We have Keith Hackney versus Joe San. Joe San, if you remember Chemo, our good friend Chemo, or maybe I don't know if I want to be associated with Chemo at this point, to be honest with you. Yeah. His manager, Joe San, decided to bear the cross this time, and I use that phrase for a very deliberate reason. Joe San decided to carry on the legacy of Chemo and Undertaker style, carry a cross that was like double his height.
Yeah.
To the ring.
It felt smaller, though, than the first one.
It did feel like it was maybe a baby cross for Joe San.
Yeah.
Joe San, 5'3", by the way. So, 5'4", I'm sorry. I don't want to... Maybe I do want to sell him short. 5'4". Now, as we were watching this fight the second time, because we actually saw this card twice, Matt learned some very interesting things about Joe San.
Well, so, Joe San is known for his martial arts style of Joseon-do.
Oh, that's right. Ah, yes.
So, I wanted to see if there were any other practitioners of Joseon-do. Maybe it caught on somewhere, but that is not the case. Looking into him, turns out he was a serial rapist.
Yeah, you know, a lot of fun facts learned here on MMA Start to Finish.
Yeah.
A lot of fun facts. His Wikipedia page is literally his fucking mugshot.
Yeah.
So
he's still in prison.
Yeah, I don't know how into the details we want to get, because it's some pretty horrible shit. I'll just read you the convictions on his Wikipedia page. Felony vandalism, torture, and voluntary manslaughter. And of course, Matt already went over his serial sexual assault record.
Yeah.
So, kind of a piece of garbage.
Even more...
Piece of trash.
What's possibly more worrying is the fact that most of those criminal acts were before this event took place.
Yeah, dude. So we were watching just like a piece of human garbage in the octagon.
Yeah.
You know, maybe though there is some karmic justice in the world because in this fight, Keith Hackney, he grappled. I don't know that you describe it, Matt. You do it.
So what I have literally word for word in my notes is, hold on, this is gonna take a second.
Oh, by the way, before we get into this funny fact, Joe-san isn't just in prison for a little while; he's in prison for life. So, in case you're wondering how serious these charges were.
So, Keith, I thought, why is he punching his lower stomach when he could be punching him in the ribs? Turns out, no. They changed the camera angle, and he was just constantly punching Joe-san in the nuts.
Blasted him full force like a jackhammer in the groin.
Yeah.
Just completely insane. So yeah, at this point, that was still legal. You could still pull hair and you could still blast to the nuts.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things were totally fine.
While Keith Hackney was doing that, he was also pulling down Joe-san's pants. I don't think he intended to do that. It was just to hold on to
Yeah, it was
him.
leverage for grappling.
But I put it as Keith Hackney winning it via nut punches and butt reveal.
Yeah, so Joe-san got some good old-fashioned Keith Hackney justice in the octagon and got some real justice later when he was sentenced for life.
Yeah. The nut punches didn't... I mean, I'm sure they played a part.
No, he tapped. He tapped to the nut punches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it seemed like the more his butt was revealed, that was when he tapped out.
Well, also, I'm sure you know, you've been hitting the nuts before. That pain's kind of delayed.
It is delayed. I feel like it's expedited when there's consistency with it.
Yeah. I also, like, you know, a lot of times, a lot of these fighters, if you hear them talk in a fight, there's a lot of adrenaline, so you don't really feel the pain. Like, if you have a broken nose, you won't feel how painful that is until after the fight. Or if you have, like, you got a bunch of leg kicks absorbed and your thighs all bruised. Do you feel a nut? Does adrenaline negate a nut punch? I don't think so.
I thought you were going to say when your nut breaks.
No nut fractures. I mean, hopefully no nut fractures.
Oh, God.
My goodness. The next fight, we saw the returning champion from UFC 3, Steve Jenham, return to the octagon to take on Melton Bowen. Melton Bowen, to our notice, unless one of these alternate fighters took this route, the first fighter to actually wear MMA gloves.
He also said he has no respect for anyone.
Oh, yeah. That's right. I have that in here word for word.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It was one in the intro video, right?
Yep.
Do you have the exact quote in there?
I think it was, he just has no respect for anyone. I don't respect anyone, is something like that.
Yeah, so after 4 minutes or so, Steve was able to catch him in an armbar. It was interesting because he actually used the cage to pull off the armbar. Mm-hmm. Correction, when I said he used the cage, I actually misremembered my notes. He did not use the cage to frame up for the armbar. Melton waved his arm like a flag, and he just fucking grabbed it. He used the cage earlier in the fight while they were grappling to, like, maintain position, but at that point in time, cage grabs were still legal, so it wasn't like a, you know, he didn't break the rules.
Yeah.
You still see a lot of cage grabs now, and they're like, it's very loosely enforced. You get a warning and then knock your hand away, but you still get position, so, you know, it could be enforced a lot better.
Yeah. So, yeah, Steve pretty much stood up, took Melton's arm, and then got an armbar.
So those gloves did not help Melton Bowen tonight.
Nope.
The next fight we have here is Dan Severn versus Anthony Macias, the hometown boy, Anthony Mad Dog Macias. 5'10", 170 pound Anthony Macias. I actually looked here. I was like, oh, this fight must have been embarrassing. He must have never wanted to fight again, right? No, dude. He has 44 fights.
Whoa.
Anthony Macias was still fighting until 2014.
Huh.
He also has like a winning record. He's 26-18.
Well, this spoils a little bit for me, but...
Well, yeah, but like you don't know when he's gonna win or lose.
I mean, I'd have to assume he won more than he lost if he has 44 fights.
Yeah, but a lot of these, I'm looking at them, especially these later fights, not in the UFC. So
okay.
We're not going to see all of his fights.
All right.
But, yeah, so Dan Severn, mixed martial arts and pro wrestling legend, Dan the Beast Severn, comes to the ring and just bodies the ever-living shit out of Anthony Macias. He has a full 100 pounds on this man. It is absurd. Almost 100 pounds, I'm sorry. A little bit of hyperbole there. 80 pounds.
I think it's I have it as 70-pound advantage, but I could be wrong.
Regardless, much larger man.
Yeah, he's a big guy.
Much larger man. And I have in my notes Suplex City because he German suplexed him like he was fucking Brock Lesnar. It was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen.
He just threw the guy around the ring.
I talked about that one fight from, I want to say it was UFC 3. I said it looked like a pro wrestling fight. This was a pro wrestling fight. And like I said, pro wrestling legend. Dan Severn would go on to have a professional wrestling career in the NWA and in the WWF and WWE eventually. So.
Did you say the NWA?
Yeah, that National Wrestling Alliance.
That's
I know it's also the rap group. Yeah, it's yeah.
That's great.
It is pretty funny. They were on first though.
Okay.
Just to be clear.
Okay.
So yeah, Dan Severn, the hometown crowd, they were so happy to have their guy in there. Dan Severn just tossed him like a sack of potatoes several times, took his back, and strangled him. Any other thoughts about this fight?
I like Dan Severn. I hope he sticks around.
We will see Dan Severn again.
Good.
I mean, based on his performance, no surprise. So, that was the quarterfinals. In the semifinals, we had Royce Gracie against Keith Hackney.
Mm-hmm.
And this was actually a very competitive fight from my memory. It went on for 5.5 minutes, so over a full round in, modern MMA. And like I have in my notes, closest fight since Chemo. Took a lot out of him. Royce did eventually catch him in an armbar, but Keith got some shots in. He showed that if you understand what Royce is doing and know some basic grappling defense, that you can get some shots in.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts about this fight, Matt?
No. Keith did a pretty good job of defending, but eventually he did get caught.
I wonder to what extent, too, with modern rules, not even a modern skill set, but modern rules, how this fight would have played out. Because Keith didn't have gloves, and as most people know, gloves aren't really to protect people's faces. They're to protect your hands. Because if you punch without gloves on and hand wraps, you're going to break your hand most of the time. It's really easy to break your hand. Keith, bare knuckle. Royce had his gi. He had his gi to use all his grappling skills.
Yeah.
If they were wearing, the trunks they have on now and MMA gloves, I wonder how this fight would have played out.
I feel like Gracie would have had a harder time, but I think probably still would have won, but it would have been a lot closer.
I agree.
It would have lasted, I think, past the normal 3 rounds that we see today.
You think it'll be 20 minutes?
Yeah.
And, we will see fights where we're like, Jesus Christ, can this fucking end? That will happen, that go 20-plus minutes. And that's part of why the rules will eventually be changed to the round system we have now. Dan Severn, back again for semifinal matchup number 2 against Marcus Buffett. Now, you may be asking yourself, where'd Steve Jenham go? Steve Jenham had to pull out due to an injury, so we see again the tournament format kind of crumbling a little bit. Didn't fall apart nearly as much as it did in UFC 3 and UFC 2.
Yeah.
But still, issues present. Marcus Buffett would be the alternate who filled in, who won his fight via KO. I think they showed a little bit of the highlights of this guy before the fight. And he looked pretty okay, actually. If he was fighting a guy who was his size, I imagine it would have been a competitive fight.
Yeah.
But we didn't see the whole fight. We only saw clips. And it was a 5-minute fight, so it took a while for him to get there. Oh, one note we have here about Dan Severn. As Dan walked to the ring, soaking wet. I don't know if he just poured a bucket of water on him before he walked to the ring, but he looked like a pro wrestler walking to the ring. With dripping wet hair, his shirt covered in moisture.
He was a very moist man.
A very moist man is how I would describe Dan Severn. The fight, we're kind of struggling here to come up with much to say about this fight, because the fight didn't go on that long. It was less than a minute. He caught him up in an arm triangle. He just took him down. I don't remember him bodying him as much as he bodied Anthony Macias.
Not nearly as much.
But he did wrestle fuck him, he got him down, and then it says here arm triangle, which sounds right. So after these 2 semifinal matchups, we're actually on a collision course for a legendary fight in MMA history. This was one of the first, even though Royce was, champions of UFC 1 and 2, going into this fight, the commentary was referring to him as the underdog still, just because of how much bigger Dan was and the fact that Dan had a grappling background. And the fight itself went on extremely long. The fight went on longer than a 3-round fight would go on now today. Went on for almost 16 minutes.
Yep.
And there were no rounds. So
it
just went for 15 minutes straight.
It felt like it was never going to end for a while.
It did. These guys were gassed at the end completely. Dan was on top of Hoist, not really able to do anything. The one thing we noticed about Dan was that he never really tried to strike anybody at all.
No.
He just bodied people with his grappling and eventually got chokes. But he didn't really have a full array of submissions like a jiu-jitsu practitioner would. He just had his wrestling skills. So he could control you, but unless you gave him something super obvious like a rear naked choke, or you gave him your arm to put in an Americana or something, he wasn't really well-rounded enough to take on somebody like Hoist, who had such a skilled grappling background. And after these 16 minutes, Hoist would eventually catch Dan in a triangle choke. And it was kind of hard to see what was developing. And the commentators to this point still not super well-versed in submissions yet, so they weren't really sure what was happening, but after a while it became clear. And the triangle, I have here triangle foreshadowed, because he actually tried a triangle much earlier in the fight. I think 5 minutes earlier he had tried a triangle, and he didn't quite get it.
Yeah. Severn tried to take Gracie, but Gracie he's just better on the ground.
They're just a much wider array of grappling skills. One note I have in here that's very funny is that Dan's wife wouldn't watch, apparently.
What?
Jeff, by the way, Jeff Blatnick, the commentator, was on, I don't remember which year it was, if it was the World Championships or the Olympics, but some wrestling team with Dan Severn, so he knew him personally. And he had inside information about Dan, and he said Dan's wife wouldn't watch the fights because she was so afraid.
She was afraid for him, huh?
She was scared for him because these guys, to this point, the UFC has a shit show of a reputation. John McCain, I don't know what year he referred to it as this, but I believe it was in the 90s. John McCain referred to it as human cockfighting and tried to get it banned in a lot of states.
He's not far off. He's not far.
At this point, there weren't enough rules for me to call this a sport. This is just like street fighting.
Yeah.
At this point, eventually rules would get implemented and it would become a sport. But to this point, that's a very, very loose use of the word sport. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's Fight Club, but try to talk about it.
And nobody to this point has, thankfully, because the rules were not very good, and especially, oh my goodness, in the first UFC where the refs couldn't stop fights and there was ambiguously fight to the death, somebody could have gotten really hurt. But even after 3 events, we see that they've developed enough sane rules so that it's, in many ways, even at this point, still safer than boxing because the stoppages happen much faster.
Yeah. And
most of these fights, every single fight on the main card, not on the alternate bouts, was a submission victory. With the caveat that Joe-san was defeated by submission via strikes.
Yeah.
Because he was punched in the nuts a million times.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts about this event, Matt?
Well, I have some thoughts about the fight still.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I thought it was smart of Gracie to not go for Severn very quickly. He seemed to hold back a bit.
Very patient. Very patient.
The first minute or 2 of the fight was them just sizing each other up, walking around the ring. When Gracie was on top or below Severn, and he was just striking at Severn, it didn't seem like his punches were doing all that much. I remember him they just seemed to hit a wall.
A lot of early jiu-jitsu practitioners, their strikes weren't really to cause damage in MMA fights. They were to get you to open up something for a submission. So it doesn't, you're not going to get knocked out by somebody palming you in the head, but it's annoying, and maybe you'll raise your hand, and then by raising your hand or your arm or moving your head, you give up your neck or you give up your arm, and then they'll take your arm or your neck. So the strikes aren't really to do damage, they're to open up submissions.
I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, so to this point, the longest fight in UFC history.
That's a long one, yeah.
A very long one. I actually, I'm not going to spoil it, but I know what winds up breaking the record for the longest MMA fight.
Oh, boy.
Your big hint, though, I'll give you a hint, though.
Uh-huh.
It's not in the UFC, but we will see it.
All right.
So there's the hint.
Is it in the U.S.?
No.
Oh.
No.
Okay. Oh, and Gracie won, of course. So lucky Gracie, he got another 60,000 plus 4,000.
That's right. The salary was upped once again.
Yeah. Not another 10,000, but it's something.
Thank you guys for watching. Next time we'll be back with UFC 5 Return of the Beast. Another poster that has Royce Gracie versus Ken Shamrock on it. I wonder if they're baiting us again or we're actually going to see this fight this time.
I want to see it, but, I don't have a whole lot of faith in it.
Looking at the poster, not to spoil too much for next time, it says UFC 5 plus the super fight, Royce Gracie versus Ken Shamrock. So hopefully this time they've booked it as its own thing. That'd be really interesting. And I might also just be remembering that they did that. So,
well,
that's a possibility as well, because I've seen a lot of these early events.
That kind of makes me wonder if that's just going to be an extra fight stacked on top.
That's what I think it will be.
Do you think they'll have it? Well, you
I would know. Yeah.
So I'm just kind of speculating. I think maybe they'll have it not as the final fight, but they'll have it more in the beginning so that it actually happens for sure.
Well, we'll find out. Until then, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you later.